Hi, welcome to the first episode of the GK2 Retrospective Saga. As a disclaimer, this video series contains heavy spoilers for Ace Attorney Investigations 2, Miles Edgeworth, Prosecutor's Path, as well as multiple spoilers for the rest of the Ace Attorney series. Proceed with caution if you've yet to complete Investigations 2 for yourself. With that all said, I hope you enjoy the video. Ace Attorney Investigations 2, Miles Edgeworth, Prosecutor's Path is a game whose reception and reverence needs no introduction. As of the making of this video, it is currently the only game in the series that has yet to be localized, the cause of it remaining Japanese exclusive even after a decade since its inception being the unfortunate timeline of which it was released, a fate shared with Fire Emblem New Mystery of the Emblem, one of my favorite games of all time. That is a story I've covered quite intensely in 2 of my previous videos, and it does not warrant further regurgitation. Investigations 2, which I'll be calling GK2 throughout this video series, in reference to its Japanese name, though mainly due to it sounding cool, has taught me an important lesson. When an art form garners a reputation for either being really good or being really bad, the best way to form an opinion about said art form is to go in blind. For you see, I came in expecting GK2 to blow my socks off.
Oh no, my friend. This is a mistake, a terrible mistake. They've gone too far. This is madness.
GK2's specific expectation-raising factors, for me and I'm sure for many people, are twofold. 1. It is very well received among fans, so why not trust them? And 2. That it is a sequel to the first Investigation spin-off entry. A game I personally deem among my top 3 favorite Ace Attorney games of all time. A questionable stance for sure. Turnabout Target, the first case of GK2, is interesting in how different it is from the rest of the GK2 cases. It is exciting and enjoyable, even on repeat playthroughs. When you consider the perspective of an unsuspecting, optimistic newcomer, Turnabout Target is the most hype-inducing case in the history of the Ace Attorney series, launching the already high expectations of said newcomer into the stratosphere. That's all that needs to be said for this introduction, so join me as I finally embark on my journey to explain why GK2, I feel, is not only a terribly written visual novel, but also the worst Ace Attorney game of all time. Following the epic intro, after rudely ignoring a definitely random reporter, Edgeworth gets into contact with Gumshoe, who tells him that he was called to the scene by the chief prosecutor, which raises the question of which one shown on screen did the calling. But that is never directly answered at any point in the game, so we must assume that it's someone else. After we finish examining the podium, Nicole Swift, the reporter from before, decides to call out yet again, only to be ignored by this slab of wood, whose reaction is so mechanical and judgmental you wonder why you even like this guy to begin with. The irony is how Edgeworth is considering the initial harmless, quiet questions the ruckus instead of the attention-grabbing arm waving. Like, is Edgeworth some sort of idiot as to not comprehend quiet versus loud? If the writers wanted Edgeworth to accuse Swift of causing a ruckus, why not do it as the response to the attention-grabbing instead of the calmer, optimistic questions? That's not even mentioning how Edgeworth didn't even recognize Swift talking to him directly just a few minutes ago, both by voice and looks. In their first encounter, Edgeworth didn't even get on the podium and literally stopped to look at her, and on their second, he goes on calling Swift a someone instead of that reporter or something along those lines. I know this is a nitpick, but then again, Edgeworth is a robot in this game for some reason, so what do I know? The writers clearly aren't thinking his little interactions through. We get the information that the crime was premeditated through the logic tutorial, before getting multiple interesting hints surrounding the president, such as the scripts scattered on the floor. While they are not used as evidence, they do imply that he was most likely rehearsing his speech, since none of the images show him using one during said speech, so he probably is qualified to give a State of the Union speech were he President of the United States. It's little things like these that show GK2's potential. In this case, we get something that's not only relatable, but it expands upon the Republic of Zhengfa by showing us how its leader acts. It shows the aftermath of the first game and makes it feel important. It's good world building, and it's a shame that GK2 decides to abandon it in later cases. Thankfully, in this case, despite a certain somewhat questionable behavior, the podium scene is overall pretty solid. We talk to a dumb forensics officer, something that was honestly done better in the first game as was much funnier, then talk to the Triple R, the so-called raving ruckus reporter, Nicole Swift. This exchange serves to connect Swift to Lada Hart, who, spoiler alert, appears in this game. What's also nice is how Edgeworth actually remembers Lada in a surprisingly natural fashion. We then find a popped Steel Samurai balloon that serves as one surprisingly well-placed fan service, as well as an interesting clue to bullet trajectory. I really like how this first case manages to be simple, but also complex, without being overly convoluted all at the same time. It's not like the first Turnabout or the Lost Turnabout where the case is clearly baby mode, with the only complication in the latter being whose phone Wellington had the whole time. It's also not like Turnabout Memories, where the case is so uninteresting and thus hard to keep track of, that all I know is that Dahlia was the killer, and the questions given are made to have you think outside the box, just to make her feel more intimidating. It's also not like the foreign Turnabout, which is literally the definition of a meandering waste of time. This case, by contrast, flows surprisingly smoothly with its logic and evidence, and never once did I feel that I was losing track of anything. It's just a shame how the later cases in GK2 don't adhere to this case progression quality that Turnabout Target had. Anyway, the mech and the Phantom decide to interrogate Nicole Swift, who the former seemingly hates for no reason, as evident by this line, almost as if he's moaning over the thought of talking to her. Maybe it's just me, but I feel that Edgeworth is a bit more impulsive than usual, almost as if the writers forgot he's supposed to be a reserved, calm, and collected character altogether. This is overcorrected later in the game, where he becomes an absolute robot, which is arguably even worse, if not just as bad, all whilst using emotionless dialogue that is never addressed by the writers at any point in the game. Like, I know they're trying to write Swift as being annoying, but she's just asking Edgeworth normal questions, just so that he would silence her and make her feel bad. Normally, it would take much more than dumb questions to annoy Edgeworth. Getting answers is one thing, but Edgemech's coming off as a bit too aggressive in this scene. Even his creator, the Phantom, is being more mature with the way he kindly asks Nicole to cooperate when she puts her guard back on. What Gumshoe did here is commendable, but is later contradicted later in this case, and even more alarmingly so throughout the rest of the game, when the first thing he does upon meeting or talking to someone is literally shout at them recklessly. I don't think Gumshoe does that, do you? Now frankly, despite my nitpicking, I can kind of forgive this scene because it justified the first logic chess, which in return was quite solid. As for the mechanic, I decided to keep the detailed stuff for a later act, but for this particular logic chess, the writers seem to understand that the only way to get Swift to talk is for the aggressing party to slow down. Which begs the question, why did Edgemech have to be so rude in the first place? By slowing down, we get Nicole to calm down herself so that she can talk, where we regurgitate what we already knew, leading to documenting her tape recorder as evidence. It's good stuff, because we've got not only testimony and evidence, but also her motivations and reasons for being here, which is simply getting a scoop. Swift even decides to become our friend, apprentice, for a while, almost like she forgave us for our earlier bullying when Edgeworth unwillingly accepted her plea for a 24-hour interview. Then she asks us about being her second mentor, which is indicative of a unique flavor of lightheartedness that becomes a major problem in later cases, although here is fresh, especially since Swift knows she can't get everything she wants. Anyway, Swift agrees to move the people in the audience to their right side so that Idiotworth can investigate the left side, who for some reason turns her down, only for Swift to end up doing it anyway. Then Payne shows up, though there isn't much to say about him since he's been relegated to a minor role just like in the first Gyakuten Kenji. I guess since this case screams most ambitious first case of all time that it actually had Payne interact with the higher-ups off-screen instead of having him do literally nothing and Turnabout Visitor then be a cameo. You win this time, GK2. Now here I mentioned the higher-ups, in this case the Chief Prosecutor, who was given permission to leave. Edgeworth considers the Chief Prosecutor calling him here a big deal, meaning that the Chief will play a big role in the story. Problem is, they never do anything compelling with it, as we'll see that the future cases were unable to do much with the Chief Prosecutor at all, provided it wasn't Blaze. More on that in Act 4. I like Edgeworth asking the question of the bodyguards not being from Zhengfa, as it turns out they're actually American/Japanese. This adds yet more world building, expanding concepts from the original Gyakuten Kenji. Again, shame on GK2 for not doing much with Zhengfa beyond what they did here. This is the best case in the game for a reason. What's also nice is Nicole eagerly telling us why the President doesn't use the police force. The President has many enemies and is hated by the Republic's public, if you will. So he had to hire a local security firm to get him bodyguards who wouldn't turn their backs on him. Swift also was at an embassy in Zhengfa off-screen. These are filler tell don't show details that apparently exist to help with the world building, and so you can wonder why I even bothered mentioning them. It's because GK2 is loaded with that kind of stuff, except here it's incredibly brief, but still adds nothing to the game. The president's political enemies never appear at any point in the game, and therefore these claims are irrelevant. This is only really done to explain why his bodyguards are given names like Naito Manosuke, and so Naito has to be Japanese in order for the rest of the story to make sense, which is quite forced now that I think about it. Sure, there's a chance the president's Zangfa bodyguards would turn on him, but this is again an excuse to justify his armor knights being Japanese and not of Zangfa origin. Ultimately, this contrived explanation is forgivable due to it not wasting my time as much. At this part of my playthrough, I tried my best to shove the metal hunk's face into the audience to see what comments they had on him. Instead, the news van was what I got from that experience, leading to an anecdote from Gumshoe which surprisingly elicits a tone you'd expect from someone like him, although the anecdote itself is nothing short of lame. We interrogate the television crew member to try to obtain footage on the speech, but we're instead told that there were technical difficulties, only for Gumshoe to step in and... You saw just a few seconds ago I was praising Gumshoe's anecdote on how gumshoey it sounded. Well, here, he's just shouting at an innocent citizen and forcing the cameraman to cooperate, in which said cameraman explains why there's no footage. This is not consistent with Gumshoe's characterization at all.
Oh no.
Kay Faraday makes her unceremonious return, and the first thing Edgeworth asks her is if she gave up on the Great Thief thing, to which she of course says no, which becomes the only subject she ever brings up throughout this game. It seems like she's only here because this is the sequel to a much better game, and so we need GK1 fan service.
Remember Kay Faraday?
Edgeworth fails to explain why Kay Faraday even came to the scene, as the writers immediately gloss over this question because screw it, we need an assistant who can't even do that. In this scene, Edgeworth is asking for help from probably the most useless character in the game. The irony is how Kay claims that Edgeworth isn't a jam, but she doesn't really do much herself. All she does is give us a few pictures and ask Edgeworth a bunch of case-relevant questions. Kay uses this moment to flame Edgeworth's stoic nature. Swift intervenes to brighten up Kay's day by regurgitating what she said about Edgeworth. Of these characters, the only one I actually like so far is Swift. Upon re-examining the trash can, Gumshoe becomes impressed with the assassin for not littering, which is another fake antic in pretending to be Gumshoe because he's now on eroding stilts. Kay becomes an idiot and twists one of Edgeworth's lines.
The way to the truth always begins with small facts.
This line is bad. Kay then says the only useful thing that somehow came to her teeny tiny brain, which has to do with speculating over why someone would use a laser pointer considering it would blow their cover. This has entirely to do with the photos she presented, which again is the only really useful thing she does in this case. The second photos even got her face on it, which does look charming enough, but nobody makes fun of her for it. Instead, it's Smart Shoe who makes fun of her for picturing a panicking crowd, an image that is ironically used quite well later on. We take the right flank only to be presented with the ultimate picture, used throughout this case and the final two cases. Meckel's haiku largely amounts to nothing, though I find it strange how Gumshoe would know what a haiku is, because he would later end up wearing a no mask. Upon closing the investigation, Gumshoe identifies John Doe as a suspect, something which Kay hastily generalizes in an unfunny way. Shelly the Killer appears with an ice cream cone that can only melt when he's tense, which is a brilliant redesign for him, but unfortunately comes with its own ramifications. Ironically, the very first cross-examination in GK2 is up against Shelly the Killer of all people, which means the first contradiction is pretty obvious, and the writers are playing him up as some form of instructor to Meckles, testing him with an obvious contradiction. Upon finding said contradiction, his wound reopens. The question of how he got wounded is answered later in this case, which indicates proper case flow. Again, this casts Turnabout Target as an exception and an outlier. Payne chimes in to remind us that he exists and tells us to arrest the killer without evidence. Kay says the traditional, "What can we do?" Nicole Swift becomes a mildly fun character, treating the scene as if it were live on television, and the killer confesses the truth. Horace Knightley appears to create an investigational roadblock, and I'll acknowledge in advance that he's the best character in the game. Shortly after, Shelly the Killer seizes Horace, threatening to kill him if he does not reopen the investigation for Meckles. It is here where Knightley makes the big reveal of John Doe being Shelly the Killer the whole time, which unfortunately comes with one major problem that ruins the fun of this scene. Miles Edgeworth, despite having seen the killer's new outfit, which literally has the very calling card emblem he used to deduce that the killer was involved in Juan's murder, is not allowed to point out Joe's real identity, for the simple fact that Horace Knightley making the reveal under this much pressure would be that much more dramatic. That's right, in order to dramatize the scene to keep the plot as superficially engaging and shocking as possible, it is Yeardley who is forced to make the reveal, because if Edgeworth did it shortly or even immediately after the killer showed up, the dramatic effect would have been diminished. This is a huge inconsistency because a big part of Farewell My Turnabout story is that Miles Edgeworth knew who Shelly the killer was, and if the writers weren't all consistent, they would have respected that by having Edgeworth make the reveal shortly after the killer's intervention. The calling card emblem is right there on his new design. However, because Takeshi Yamazaki is such a hack, he was more than willing to force Edgeworth to be an idiot, just so his superficial plot can be that much more tense. A clear case of plot slaving at the character's expense.
The court accepts this Ace Attorney Wiki article on Shelly the Killer as evidence.
Back to the story now. Knightley, fearing for his life, unwillingly reopens the investigation for the passive moron, taunting the good guys, leading us into the final investigation. Before we begin proper, however, Meckel sets up a problematic plane plan, which we'll get back to, don't you worry. Shelly the Killer mocks Knightley over his inexperience, praising the victim in so doing. Meckles asks Knightley about Rook's weapon, which is actually from Zhang Fa, making you wonder even more why the president needed to have his bodyguards not be from that nation if his bodyguard weapons are. In stark contrast to Nicole Swift showing genuine fear, begging to be taken seriously that she isn't the culprit who killed Rook, Kay offers pointless comments in a happy-go-lucky tone. This will not be the only time you will hear me say this. Even Shelly makes fun of her, almost as if the writers were self-aware. Talking to the killer. He keeps track of Edgeworth's investigation and reminds us not to betray him, something Edgeworth should have already known when he first saw him in this case, because he literally saw it happen at the end of GS2. Also, why would the killer come here to kill the president only to change course on Rook's death?
Well, you got me. By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
If Shelly's initial job is futile, does that mean he got betrayed by his master this early on? These questions are going onto the list of overarching plot threads that could potentially be ignored. Pivoting away from awfulness, Kay decides to ponder Knightley's neck condition, which the killer does the right thing by not only telling but showing her, and by extension you, the player, how the injury came to be.
That's pretty good.
Shelly threatens the president to step outside of the door or else he will kill his bodyguard. This is a scene I do like, by the way, since it emphasizes the president's selfish fear of death, as well as Knightley's undying loyalty to his leader. The killer then suddenly rage quits and turns lights off, as he indeed was after the president he's been pursuing for 3 days. He proceeds to knock everyone out, including Knightley, who he decides to spare for some unknown reason, despite knowing Yeardley killed Rook according to himself, and tells Edgeworth that he's already seen the truth, leaving the rest to him. Not a word from Nicole Swift, who the writers apparently forgot was even there. Everyone wakes up just to hear that Gumshoe and his men couldn't stop the killer from escaping using the lifeboat which he stole, as it is now missing from the scene, which shows that the killer did use the lifeboat to escape the scene, and that's a good thing. Knightley announces the president's entry, and the game wastes no time with its intervention feeling spectacular and intimidating with a brief noble pause. Edgeworth instantly knew the president's full name, even though he couldn't immediately recognize Shelly the killer from his outfit. Oh, I know why. It's because Edgeworth doing that now is not inconvenient to the plot. Bad writing is everywhere here. Edgeworth's idiocy isn't even consistent. The president, Di Huang, greets Edgeworth and honors his actions in the last game. Again, it's a shame that this is the only time GK1 ever gets any continuity, as the rest of the game pursues a story mostly disconnected from where GK1 left off, although to be honest, that game ended in a way where it didn't really need a sequel. The president then immediately turns a complete 180, copying the killer's line whilst also condemning Edgeworth for allowing the killer to escape, even though there was nothing Edgeworth could do. Gumshoe shouts at the president, which is indefensible because Gumshoe isn't this rash and unlikable. What great characters, guys! Edgeworth also pulls a jerk move by arrogantly opposing the president, who rightfully shuts him down. I find it very funny how the protagonists are mostly unlikable/uninteresting in this game, while the antagonists here, in this case at least, have more level heads. Yeah, need I remind you that this game is supposed to be better than Trials and Tribulations somehow. Back to the scene. The President decrees that all our evidence will be taken away from us, but this isn't something that's told to intimidate us. The game actually uses subtext in the organizer to show that Knightley did indeed take away all the evidence, leaving only Edgeworth's prosecutor badge and the profiles. Yet another hallmark of good case writing in what is sadly the only case in this game to have it. We get into the logic chess realm to do battle with the President directly. Huang forces Edgeworth to back off, so Edgeworth makes a nod to Apollo Justice's perceived mechanic and pursues the President's reasons for stopping us from investigating. The game here is to wait until the President tells us that we can't just do anything we want as the place belongs to Zheng Fa. We then ask the President why, to which he says there is no reason, to which Edgeworth then uses the clue of extraterritorial rights. To get the full context for why the President is acting this way, we must pivot towards the major contrivance that is Edgeworth's dumb plane lock move and why it's so bad. A few acts ago, when Edgeworth ordered Detective Gumshoe to surround the plane to prevent it from escaping, I felt something was dangerously wrong. Upon looking back at the second case, I realized that this was the very thing that set the story in motion, opening Edgeworth's conflict with the PIC, who threatened to take away his badge over a crime he actually committed. Now, what crime has Edgeworth committed? More specifically, which law or laws did he violate? If you guessed laws related to extraterritorial rights, you're correct. Now, normally, Edgeworth would think twice about breaking a law, since he knows full well the consequences as well as pretty much everything in the book. That was obvious since the original trilogy, and GK1 respected it by staying true to Edgeworth's character by giving him second thoughts before he presented illegal evidence. However, in Turnabout Target no less, Edgeworth is being portrayed as an idiot, who forgot how previously fearful he was of extraterritorial rights in Turnabout Ablaze. And Turnabout Target, mind you, isn't long after Turnabout Ablaze, which is the case that first brings up extraterritorial rights as an investigative roadblock. So extraterritorial rights should be very fresh in Edgeworth's mind. Now, you may make an argument saying that what Edgeworth did was clearly a mistake, since he's obviously not a perfect character, right? But how could it be a mistake, let alone a reasonable one? Edgeworth literally took it very seriously in Turnabout Ablaze, waiting for Quercus Alba's shield to fall from his personage before striking back. You may also make an argument saying that Edgeworth was not in a different country at the time of Turnabout Target, but surely Edgeworth would know that the plane, which belonged to Zheng Fa, should not be held down from takeoff even on home soil. He even acknowledges it here, so the prospect of it being a mistake is unlikely. People try defending this by saying he's had enough of extraterritorial rights. But I don't think Edgeworth is arrogant or ignorant enough to do something like that, especially since throughout the game, he never resents his foolish, should I say childish, actions. Like, at this point, there's no way Edgeworth would do something this rash. It is true that Edgeworth uses illegal evidence in the first investigations, but 1, he actually thinks it through as he may end up breaking the law, and 2, in finding the truth, he exposes how Alba was using the law in an immoral fashion, hence Edgeworth not being punished at the end. It's very ironic how Edgeworth ends up not getting punished for rashly breaking international law in GK2, as opposed to a rather justified use of illegal evidence from GK1. Both games end without having Edgeworth account for the crimes he committed. Only in GK2, what Edgeworth did was uncalled for, unjustified, and unnecessary. GK1, meanwhile, implements the broken law thing far better. In that game, presenting the illegal evidence on screen was an act I still remember because it's crucial to Turnabout Ablaze, and can't be cut out else it will lower the tension. In GK2, Edgeworth breaks international laws concerning extraterritorial rights for seemingly no reason. Like, why did Edgeworth order Gumshoe to get his men to surround a plane? What would he gain from doing it? If it's to hold the plane down, why do it if there's no threat of the plane flying off? If even the dialogue never brings it up other than, leave the plane. Also, is surrounding the plane even messing with Zheng Fa property at all? Surely they have to anchor it or something, but GK2 never answers that question directly. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if I missed something, because there's so much wrong with this contrivance being off-screen. The transition where we see Edgeworth telling Gumshoe to gather his men to surround the plane is literally a black screen. Edgeworth never outright tells Gumshoe why he should do it, or even its purpose, which is never shown or explained. Even when Gumshoe entered the plane earlier, he just said he got his men, but we don't even pan to the plane exterior to show us all the cops anchoring the plane to prevent it from flying or something like that. The plane's boat disappeared, but that only indicates that Shelly the killer escaped. We need more than that to prove that Gumshoe's men did hold the plane down, like briefly pan to a still frame of Gumshoe's men anchoring the plane and surrounding it. Without showing anything pertaining to the very driving force of the story, there's no way to prove if Edgeworth even violated the extraterritorial rights laws at all, rendering the story completely pointless. Yeah, this game is fantastic writing, guys. This is how you should make a story happen. First, have Edgeworth do something stupid and out of character just to get the PIC chasing after him in later cases because there was no other way to get the plot going. Again, plot over characters. Second, give Edgeworth no motive for it when the threat isn't made apparent. Third, it's literally pointless as it accomplishes nothing in the case and isn't even proven because it's telling without showing. Fourth, give it as little screen time as possible so players won't notice it, even though it is the very thing that lands Edgeworth in trouble. In other words, GK2's story was only possible because of something that shouldn't have happened in the first place. You see why this dumb decision is a problem now? As I said earlier, it can be cut out indefinitely and Turnabout Target could have started, progressed, and ended in the exact same way. In this logic chess section against the president, Edgeworth even acknowledges that extraterritorial rights exist with detailed knowledge no less, so why violate them to begin with? Inside the plane, Edgeworth does overstep Huang's authority via sheer arrogance, but he doesn't investigate the plane until the president gives him permission after you expose his secret, which is how Edgeworth overrides the extraterritorial rights obstacle in GK2, since there's no one to take away the president's extraterritorial rights this time around, considering he is literally the commander-in-chief of Zheng Fa. And yeah, not only is this the only time GK2 expands on GK1's concepts surrounding extraterritorial rights, but holding the plane down had no hand in this fight, only Edgeworth's adamance to find the truth. I'm dead serious, they could have easily had Edgeworth act the way he did inside the plane, waiting until the president issues his permission to investigate, but cut out the arrogance and especially the whole plane anchoring order out to stay true to Edgeworth's characterization. This is the worst part about Turnabout Target, and with how little screen time it gets, I'm surprised I spent this much time dissecting this contrivance and explaining why it's so bad. Now I believe that if GK2 wanted to make an ambitious story about Edgeworth being chased by the PIC or some other legal entity for committing a crime, they could address his use of illegal evidence in Turnabout Ablaze, a topic of moral ambiguity, much like Phoenix getting disbarred for using forged evidence in Apollo Justice, the question of which, is the truth more important than the law? Despite appearing only very briefly, I feel that the first investigations did a great job with that premise. I just wish GK2 expanded on it without abandoning the continuity just one case later. I could also see the base story working only if they used a new protagonist. Think a rookie prosecutor who's unaware of extraterritorial rights and international law in general, instead of breaking Edgeworth's character by having him unnaturally break laws that he should know very well by now. But this fix, in the form of having a new protagonist, can't be applied, since Turnabout Target had to pick Edgeworth, celebrating him as the one who saved Zheng Fa in the previous game, just to make him look better than he actually is. See, this game pretends to be a sequel, but has a hard time being consistent with previous entries. The worst part of this whole debacle is that fixing it is so easy. Remember what I said about GK1 having Edgeworth never account for presenting illegal evidence? Since Turnabout Target can easily play out as normal without the surrounding the plane act, remove said act indefinitely, but have the PIC's basis for threatening Edgeworth's job be the use of illegal evidence from Turnabout Ablaze, since Edgeworth never accounts for that action in GK1, even though it is justified considering it was his only hope, not to mention the villainy of Alabast's law system playing alongside it. It not only alleviates a stupid excuse for a driving force, but also provides continuity using an existing act that had actual effort put into it, making the first investigations feel important. Zheng Fa and its president appear in this case, recalling Edgeworth's heroism from GK2's far superior predecessor, so why disconnect the continuity with something that shouldn't have happened, when the driving force of GK2's story could have easily been taken from Turnabout Ablaze and expanded upon? Why has Yamazaki never used the first game to his advantage when writing his second Ace Attorney game? Keep this all in mind, because we shall expand on in Act 2 when Justine Courtney shows up. For now, Huang confirms to claiming extraterritorial rights, which are protecting him. With this next line from Forgets-a-Lot, you may hopefully see what I meant by what I was saying about a huge contrivance in the previous section. Here, Edgeworth literally admits to knowing extraterritorial rights, then violates them anyway by surrounding the plane. Notice especially that he mentions international law, meaning he studied law quite extensively, which is accurate. But why violate laws you already knew when it wasn't even necessary? GK2 is such great writing, guys. Surely I'm the wrong one when I say this is a contrivance that makes no sense, let alone one of the worst ones in the game, despite being in the best case ironically. Anyway, Edgeworth tries to claim that the president's protection isn't valid, which literally makes no sense, because Edgeworth apparently doesn't know what authority is. Speaking of that, Huang brings up his authority, calling that the right word instead of forceful. Because yes, who asked for your opinion? What is quite sad, however, is the relative expressiveness of the logic chess choices, which doesn't mesh well with our blank slate protagonist. More on logic chess much later on in the series. Anyway, it is here where Knightley returns the evidence. Nothing wrong here save for the fact I still root for the antagonists way more. And yes, I agree, Knightley, this machine is a massive jerk, and I understand he's trying to act cool, but it just makes you wonder why I liked Edgeworth to begin with. How does the president even put up with this dishonorable excuse? All of these supposedly heroic characters are so unlikable. With Gumshoe's line here, they're sounding really off. First of all, why is he shouting? Second, why does he sound so smart? Third, the I see at the start of his paragraph could be him just saying Naruhodo in Japanese, but his face and tone is conflicting. This last error can be attributed to poor translation, but I doubt a localization will fix someone whose face is always like that, especially since I don't think it's all that fair to hold the fans as the ones responsible. This line, said by the president, in response to you casting doubt on Knightley, is forcing you to believe that Knightley has been serving the president since he was 21. In the Japanese version of the game, Knightley is 26 and not 24, so this line does make more sense then. But as it is, it's safe to assume Yeardley hasn't done much in service of his boss. I mean, his core motivation is literally taking out the rook so that he can become the knight. What a superficial motif to aim for. Kay hastily generalizes again, and Meckles does the exact opposite by saying all Yeardley did was shoot a balloon. Yes, this guy is a Crimean Lance General with blue hair. I'm reviewing this garbage my way. At least he isn't garbage, and I do wish he shot the mech, but I really do think his bullet's fate would end up the same as the final piece of evidence. Again, the case is largely well written for the most part, but the characters are way out of sync. The president's breakdown is weird because if he turns so thin from bellowing all that air which was making him buff, how does he gain so much weight? At least what caused the president to go bear mode made sense, because this line is surprisingly well utilized. Also, can I punch this guy? With Vi's metallic fists so my carpal bones don't get fractured from hitting it. Oh, don't act surprised, stupid face. Knightley's dialogue is infinitely more expressive than yours will ever be. Yeardley points his javelin at Nicole Swift, whose angry face implies she has something to say. She unravels the seams, and all goes south for the Armor Knight, as even the president confesses the full plan. As he confessed, I was completely wondering who leaked the false assassination plan, and how. That is never explained at any later point in the game, meaning we have no choice but to accept that whoever ordered the killer to assassinate the president somehow found out about his plan, and had some bad blood with the president, the impetus of which could be addressed, and it becomes a major question that needs answering, so onto the list it goes. Final showdown. Okay, I'm going to be honest, there isn't really much I can say about it other than it's pretty good. If I tried to make this section any longer, I would just regurgitate the plot, including case-relevant data, not to mention everything I was saying about the characters before. So as Knightley defeated, it's time to discuss this case's ending. The president reveals additional backstory to the fake assassination plan, immediately stating that he has some unfinished business outside of Zhengfa, aka staying in California. Meckles chooses to show further disrespect to a freaking president by calling him a sinner due to his involvement with something evil. I can't help but pity the Kangas ripoff, as he just accepts his wrongdoings and heads back to his aircraft. Now this scene on its own is pretty good story-wise. However, it has the unfortunate burden of setting up multiple plot points. This isn't an episodic game like GK1, so the ending here must carry a lot of weight. You will be asking questions that should be kept at the back of your head, waiting to be addressed as the game progresses. The questions presented here are as follows. 1. Why is the president sticking around? What does he plan to do in America? 2. What crime did Nicole Swift commit besides being an accomplice? Has Nicole been questioned or sentenced at all? 3. Is Meckles being hounded by the press over harassing a foreign president? I don't necessarily blame them, but this is obviously just baiting the PIC into challenging him come the next case. 4. Shelly the Killer is the main draw here, as even the no penalty question makes it quite obvious what to present. Who ordered him to assassinate the president, and why? These questions and more are ostensibly the numerous setups this ending unearths from beneath, which is why Target appeared so promising when I first played it. Unfortunately, the rest of the game fails to live up to the expectations established by this very, very ambitious first case. In fact, GK2, as a whole, can be described in one word as overambitious, personified by this mechanical line right here. Personally speaking, Turnabout Target is the high point of GK2, so it's all downhill from here, but since it already has so many red flags present throughout, these very red flags become incredibly prophetic. Before we get into the case section, I must first discuss how my feelings have changed towards this first case that I once dubbed, quote, the best in the series, unquote, because it clearly isn't that at all. Especially considering that my appreciation for this case has continued to wane over time. Now, some of you may remember the prelude, where I used simple reasoning to explain why I thought Turnabout Target to be the king of intro cases. GK2's first boss is not shown to the player, meaning you also have to figure out who killed the victim. In addition, there are actual investigations with multiple locations, a trait shared with GK1. Sounds impressive on the surface, but that is sadly what Turnabout Target is. It is superficially impressive, but the actual writing is terrible when you look at it at a much deeper and analytical level. What I found enjoyable about Target on my repeat playthrough was the logic and evidence, and yet I actively found myself hating the dialogue. So this case can only really be described as badly written, but fun. Because not every first case is enjoyable if you ask me. Over time, I replayed the first cases of every game in this series, and found that most of them are actually infinitely better than Turnabout Target, save for two, Turnabout Memories and the Foreign Turnabout. Allow me to explain. Personally, I consider those three first cases the worst in the series, with Memories as the third worst, Turnabout Target in second place, and the Foreign Turnabout taking the cake. Memories is basically the opposite of Turnabout Target. It is a rather boring case with unengaging dialogue. Dialogue that is better than the likes of Turnabout Target, sure, which is why it's better, but it's just nauseatingly boring. However, it is much better written, as Mia Fey has an actual personality, if neutered considering she never had much to begin with, but she's not the unlikable scumbag that Meckles is. The characters are also respected by the writer, which is why everything they do is consistent with their characterization. This is the very reason I disagree with anyone who will tell you that GS3 is somehow inferior to GK2, since it is self-evident which game is better written overall. Characters are more important than plot, and GS3 understands that. This is coming from a person who doesn't even like GS3 all that much. Then we have the Foreign Turnabout, which is a cautionary tale of how not to write a first case in an Ace Attorney game. Despite Phoenix's own life being on the line, there is no tension because the writers keep doing whatever the heck they feel like, as opposed to moving the story forward in a meaningful way. Though I grew to appreciate Guitar Jesus as a character, he is exceedingly pathetic for a first boss, unlike Knightley, who is exceedingly clever, and far more satisfying to defeat. Turnabout Target is teeming with action, something the Foreign Turnabout lacks almost indefinitely throughout its runtime. The dialogue is more enjoyable in GS6, as I mentioned briefly in the Geru video, but the writing there is still bad, arguably more so in the Foreign Turnabout, since it isn't setting up anything outside of Dirk at the very tail end of the case, unlike Turnabout Target, which sets up multiple plot threads at the end, alongside a couple more as you play through it, as any good story introduction should. This gives the impression that the GS6 writers did not care about the story they were writing, and it's why I genuinely despise the Foreign Turnabout, good lines and jokes notwithstanding. Onto the case section. As a case, Turnabout Target is very tight, terrible character writing notwithstanding, with well thought out evidence, reasoning, and logic. There is practically nothing bad or off about the puzzles, and all the right pieces are in place. Knightley, for example, also had a satisfying sensible weakness, that being his lack of gloves, which exposed his act of tampering with the evidence he possessed. The case is taking an active role in the story, and as stated numerous times prior, it's for that reason why Turnabout Target remains, even after replaying GK2, the best case in the game. It is the only case in the game to have actual case writing, a trait that is unfortunately abandoned by the rest of the game in favor of the horrendous plot slaving this game is so overwhelmingly obsessed with. Turnabout Target, as it stands, is basically a GK1 case but with bad character writing, and is still a fun time overall. Some people complain that it drags near the end, but I personally felt that it never overstayed its welcome. However, considering this is one of the lowest rated cases in GK2, this probably shouldn't surprise me, despite the fact this case had actual thought put into it. The case section will make up a good portion of the respective cases ranking, so yes, I do think trivial things such as case logic and puzzles add up. The case writing in Turnabout Target gets an overall rating of 8 out of 10, the following factors being, starting with the good. 1. Knightley's threatening of Edgeworth to hand over the evidence has in-game consequences, but it isn't just a brief period of losing evidence. One of the crucial bits of evidence is altered in Knightley's possession, and it was very cathartic to expose that alteration in Knightley's pursuit. 2. The evidence complements the case logic, and constantly changes and evolves the more is learned. As someone who loved the original Gyakuten Kenji for its tight case writing, the one strength this otherwise awful case has is retained from GK2's predecessor. 3. The difficulty balancing is very well thought out for an intro case. Seems all good, right? Unfortunately, there is a gaping hole in the case logic, but it isn't entirely Turnabout Target's fault, as this bit is relevant throughout the entire game. It all pertains to our good old friend, the Red Raincoat. How many Red Raincoats are there? Is Nicole Swift's red coat really her parka? The only raincoat that is examined is the killer's, so who knows how many raincoats were actually used throughout the case, and by extension, the entire game. It's safe to assume the killer's was confiscated by forensics, but what's to say about the others? Do we ever find the red raincoat used at the end of the game outside of images presented? That does it for the case section. In conclusion, Turnabout Target is a case I once held strong reverence for, and at one point deemed it the best first case ever written. Unfortunately, once you get past the otherwise solid case writing, the actual story and characters are largely bad. Considering GK2 is a game predicated on the quality of its story writing, it's unfeasible to judge this game's writing on account of its case writing alone. What cemented this was how the rest of the cases basically went full ham on expositing this game's story over actually doing anything with the case logic and puzzles of said cases. If I were to rate the case overall, it would be a 4 out of 10. Turnabout Target is the only case in GK2 with a case that is constantly developing naturally and has a satisfying conclusion. It is also the only case in GK2 to have characters that I actually liked, those being Nicole Swift, the President, Dijun Huang, and Horace Knightley. It does a good job setting up numerous plot threads to be expanded upon later in the story, and, to this day, despite being badly written with a lot of contrivances, remains the most dense and ambitious first case in the series.